Dust rose in the air like old ghosts as a broken wagon creaked into the edge of Dead Hollow, a forgotten town clinging to the ends of the frontier. Its wheels groaned with every inch, carrying two souls and a betrayal deeper than any canyon. Inside the wagon sat a girl no older than 20. Her belly was swollen with child, her wrists tied with fraying rope, and her eyes empty like a sky after the storm. Her name was Nora Quinn. Her mother, Martha Quinn, a bitter woman hardened by life and greed, yanked her out roughly. "Stand straight, you might still look worth something," she hissed, spitting in the dust. Nora didn't cry, not anymore. She had cried through the nights with no food, cried when her mother took coins from strangers in exchange for her pride. But now she was beyond tears. Her silence was louder than screams. They pushed through the saloon doors where men played cards, drank rot-gut whiskey, and laughed the laughter of men who had nothing to lose. But their laughter died when they saw the girl. Martha raised her voice. "This girl," she declared coldly, "is carrying a child. My burden. Not worth feeding no more. But she's strong, quiet, and not diseased." The room turned stiff. Some men laughed. Others looked away. $10, she said, "and she's yours." In a dark corner of the saloon, a tall man raised his head. His name was Wyatt Thorne, a lonely rancher. His coat was dusty, his face marked by years of sun and sorrow. They said he buried more than he harvested: cattle, fences, and dreams. He watched the girl, not her belly, not her bruises, just her eyes. Eyes that had stopped hoping. Eyes that reminded him of his own. "She ain't no slave," he said in a steady voice. Martha turned, annoyed. "You buying or judging, mister?" Wyatt stood slowly. "I ain't buying no woman," he said, "but I'll take her." No one spoke as he walked forward and tossed a handful of silver coins on the table. "That's for her ride. I'll take care of the rest." They rode 30 miles in silence. Her wrists were free now, the reins loose in his hand. The wind was dry and the sun fading when they reached his ranch, a lonely house nestled in dust and hills, a barn to one side, and nothing but silence to keep them company. She sat by the fire, not eating the stew he made. "You hungry or just stubborn?" he asked. She didn't look at him. "What do you want from me?" He took a long breath. "Nothing." She turned, eyes narrowed. "No man does something for nothing." Wyatt didn't answer. He just said, "You need it out." I had room. That night, Wyatt lay awake staring at the wooden ceiling while the fire cracked in the other room. In his dreams, he saw blood, a woman's voice, the echo of a life he couldn't save, and then silence. The next morning, Nora stepped outside and let the sun warm her skin. It was the first time she stood without ropes. Wyatt was mending the fence, hammer in hand. She walked slowly. "Need help?" He looked at her belly. "You shouldn't be lifting." "I want to feel useful," she said. He handed her a bucket of nails. "Then hold this. That's enough." She smiled, just barely, but enough to matter. Days passed. The silence between them became soft instead of sharp. She cooked. He fixed broken things. One night thunder rolled and Nora screamed in her sleep. Wyatt burst in, gun drawn, heart racing. She cried, curled up. "She used to sell me for drinks," she whispered. "My own mother." He stood there, unsure, then slowly sat beside her bed. He didn't speak. He didn't touch. He just sat still, steady, present. And for the first time, Nora slept again. Nora woke to the smell of coffee and the crackle of firewood. The warmth in the cabin was different that morning, not just from the flames, but from something quieter, like the air had learned how to breathe softer. She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders and sat up slowly, hands resting on her round stomach. The baby hadn't moved much lately. She worried sometimes, but then again, she always worried. Wyatt was outside feeding the horses. She watched him through the fogged window, the way he moved with purpose, silent and steady, not like other men. He hadn't asked questions. He hadn't touched her. He hadn't even looked at her the way others did. And yet, she felt his presence like a shadow that didn't frighten her. When he came back in, boots muddy and hair damp with morning dew, he nodded once in her direction. "You sleep all right?" he asked. She nodded. "Better than usual." There was a long pause before she added, "Thanks for last night." Wyatt didn't respond. He only poured her a cup of coffee and set it down gently on the table between them. That day passed like most others, slowly, quietly, wrapped in the rhythm of chores and breath and glances. Nora started sweeping the porch, though Wyatt insisted she rest. "You've done enough," he'd say. But she kept going. She wasn't used to stillness. Stillness felt too much like being forgotten. As days turned to weeks, her steps became heavier, her breath shorter. The baby kicked more now, strong and wild, as if reminding her it was still there, still real. She would talk to it sometimes when Wyatt wasn't looking. Whisper promises and lullabies she barely remembered from childhood. One evening, after dinner, Nora sat on the porch, watching the sky turn to fire. Wyatt stood near the corral, leaning against the post. She turned to him suddenly. "What happened to her?" she asked. "The woman in your dreams." He didn't move, but she saw his jaw tighten. "You call her name sometimes," she said, softer now. "You say you're sorry." There was silence. Then, his voice, rough and low. "Her name was Clara, my wife." Nora blinked, unsure if she'd crossed a line. "What happened?" Wyatt's eyes stayed on the sky. "We lost the baby. She bled too much. Never got up again after that." His voice cracked at the edge. "She wanted a girl. Said she'd call her Hope." Nora felt her throat tighten. "I'm sorry." He finally looked at her. "You don't need to be. Life doesn't owe us fair. It just gives and takes." For a moment, they just looked at each other. Two people shaped by loss, bound by silence, breathing the same hard truth. That night, when she lay down, the baby kicked so hard it made her gasp. She smiled despite herself. "Easy now," she whispered. "You'll meet him soon." The next morning brought rain, a rare, gentle drizzle that softened the earth and made everything smell like beginnings. Wyatt found Nora sitting near the barn, her hands on her belly, face tilted to the sky. "You're gonna get soaked," he said. "I like it," she replied, smiling faintly. "Rain makes me feel like I'm not dirty anymore." He didn't know what to say to that, so he just stood beside her, in silence, letting the rain fall on them both. Over the next few days, something changed between them, not with words or touch, but in the way they moved near each other. Wyatt began carving a small wooden cradle from old barn wood. He didn't say it was for her, but she knew. She watched his hands shape the curves, his eyes focused with quiet devotion. It was the first time someone had built something for her. Not taken, not used, built. One evening, as she passed him in the kitchen, she paused. "Why do you keep helping me?" He didn't look at her. "Because you're worth more than how they treated you." Her breath caught. That one sentence undid something inside her. She went to her room and cried, not out of pain, but out of the terrifying feeling that she might still matter. One night, the pain began. It was sharp and sudden, like lightning under her ribs. She cried out, clutching the doorframe. Wyatt came running, panic breaking through his usually calm face. "The baby!" she gasped. "It's coming!" He didn't waste a second. He helped her to the bed, fetched water, towels, everything he could remember from old stories and moments half forgotten. Hours passed. She screamed. She cried. He held her hand through it all. And just before dawn, the cry of a newborn filled the small wooden house. Wyatt sat back, exhausted, watching Nora cradle a tiny red-faced baby girl against her chest. Tears streamed down her cheeks. She laughed through sobs. "She's here," she whispered. "She's really here." Wyatt's hands trembled as he touched the child's head. "What's her name?" he asked. Nora looked up at him, eyes shining in the firelight. "Hope," she said. "Her name is Hope." Hope changed everything. The cabin, once echoing with silence, now filled with soft coos, gentle lullabies, and the quiet shuffle of baby blankets. Nora moved through the house with a new lightness in her step, though her body still ached from labor. She would sit by the fire, with hope wrapped to her chest, humming tunes that came back to her like echoes from a life she'd never fully lived. Wyatt built more than just a cradle. He fixed the roof where it leaked near the chimney, repaired the barn door so it didn't creak in the wind, hung new curtains Nora had sewn from old fabric. The house began to feel less like a place to survive, and more like a place to begin again. They didn't call it love, not yet, maybe not even in words, but something lived in the way Wyatt would pause every time he passed Nora holding the baby, in the way she'd set an extra spoon at the table without thinking, in the way they moved around each other like they belonged. One night, Wyatt returned late from town, dust covering his boots and a box in his hands. Nora looked up from the table, where Hope slept in a basket beside her. "What's that?" she asked. He set the box down and opened it. Inside was a pale blue dress, simple but clean, and a small hand-stitched blanket with roses on the edges. "It's not much," he said, almost embarrassed. "But I figured she should have something soft." Nora stared at him for a long time. Her throat tightened, and she didn't speak right away. Then, softly, she whispered, "No one's ever bought her something just because they wanted to." Wyatt didn't answer. He only nodded and turned away, but she saw the red in his ears and the tightness in his shoulders. She smiled. Later that night, after Hope had fallen asleep in her arms, Nora stood at the cabin doorway, watching the stars. Wyatt was sitting on the steps, sharpening his knife out of habit, his face caught in shadow. She stepped closer and sat beside him. "She has your quiet," she said. He glanced at her, surprised. "What do you mean?" "Hope. She doesn't cry much, watches everything. She's gentle, just like you." He looked away, jaw tight. "I wasn't always gentle." "None of us were always anything," she whispered. "We become things because we have to." A long silence followed. Then Wyatt spoke, voice hoarse. "I thought I'd spend the rest of my life alone, that I'd just wait out the days until the land buried me." "And now?" she asked, eyes searching his. He looked at her then, really looked, and something old and wounded softened in his gaze. "Now I feel like something's waking up." Over the weeks, their connection grew deeper. Wyatt taught Nora how to ride his quietest horse. She taught him how to swaddle a baby properly without making Hope scream. He laughed more now, not loudly, but enough that it made her smile. And sometimes, at night, when the baby was asleep and the lantern burned low, they'd sit close on the porch, their arms brushing, sharing quiet dreams they never dared speak aloud. But the world has a way of testing peace. One morning, a rider came up the trail, a stranger dressed in black, with a scar over one cheek and a toothpick in his mouth. He didn't smile, just tipped his hat and tied his horse near the gate. Wyatt stepped out, hand near his holster. The man's voice was lazy but sharp. "Looking for a girl, pregnant, name's Nora Quinn, belongs to a woman in Kansas, claims she was stolen." Nora stepped out before Wyatt could respond, her voice calm but cold. "I don't belong to anyone." The man's eyes narrowed. "That ain't what the law says." "There is no law where my mother is," she snapped. "Only money, and I'm not going back." The rider shifted. "Well, someone paid me to return you. Paid good. I ain't partial to right or wrong, just gold." Wyatt stepped forward. "You'll have to go through me then." The man chuckled, but his eyes were like ice. "You sure you want to die for someone else's woman, rancher?" "She ain't someone else's anything," Wyatt said calmly. "She's free, like every soul out here should be." The rider stared at them for a moment, then spat in the dirt. "Ain't worth the bullets." He turned, mounted his horse, and rode off without another word. Wyatt watched him disappear into the dust. Then he turned to the Nora. "You all right?" She nodded, but her hands were shaking. "They'll come again. She won't stop." He stepped closer, put his hand on her shoulder. "Then let 'em come. I've faced worse." She looked up at him. "Why would you fight for me?" He didn't speak, just stared at her, long and deep, and then did something he hadn't done since she arrived. He took her hand in his, slowly, carefully, like it was the most fragile thing in the world. And for the first time in her life, Nora felt chosen. The days after the rider's visit passed slower, heavier. Nora noticed the way Wyatt checked the windows before going to bed, how he oiled his rifle twice a week instead of once, the way his eyes lingered on the horizon a little longer than before. She knew he was preparing, not just for the man to return, but for the truth that danger now had their scent. Hope remained the light in the cabin, laughing in her sleep, making tiny fists in the air. Nora rocked her in the afternoons near the fireplace, humming lullabies that carried through the walls like warmth. But even joy felt fragile now, like it could be knocked over if the wind blew too hard. One evening, as Wyatt came back from checking the fence line, he found Nora sitting on the porch, shoulders trembling. She didn't look up as he approached, only kept her arms wrapped around her knees. "I don't want her to grow up afraid," she said. Wyatt sat beside her, silent. "I don't want her to flinch when someone raises a hand, or think her worth depends on what a man pays." Wyatt's throat tightened. "She won't." "You don't know that," Nora whispered. "The world's cruel, especially to girls like her, like me." He turned toward her, voice steady. "That's why we stay strong, so she never feels what you did." She looked at him then, really looked, and for a moment something unspoken passed between them. A trust, a vow, a flicker of something dangerously close to love. The next morning brought frost. Wyatt wrapped Hope in a quilt and carried her as Nora prepared breakfast. He moved through the cabin like he'd done it all his life, cradling the baby, whispering nonsense words, grinning when she smiled. It made something stir in Nora's chest she didn't have words for. Not yet. Maybe never. Later, while they were cleaning out the barn, Nora turned to him, hands on her hips. "What were you like before?" He raised an eyebrow. "Before what?" "Before this. Before me. Before the silence." He chuckled. "Quieter, meaner, got drunk more." "And now?" He looked at her, long and thoughtful. "Now, I look forward to mornings." Nora blushed, turning away to hide the smile. But it was too late. Wyatt had seen it, and something warm spread in his chest. That night, as a cold wind swept through the hills, they sat near the fire. Hope lay asleep in her cradle. Nora sipped tea, her legs tucked beneath her. Wyatt leaned back in his chair, boots crossed, the flicker of firelight dancing on his face. "I want to stay," she said suddenly. He looked up. "I want this to be home. I want her to grow up here, with trees and horses and—" She paused. "With you." He didn't respond right away, just stared at the flames. Then he set down his cup and turned to her fully. "I want that too." Silence stretched, full and rich. Then, slowly, he reached for her hand. This time, she didn't pull away. Spring crept in like a second chance. Grass grew where there had only been dust. Birds returned to the trees behind the barn. The creek that had been dry for months began to babble again, bringing with it the sound of life. Nora took Hope outside every morning, wrapping her in blankets and holding her up to the sun. "See that?" she'd whisper. "That's yours too, this land, this sky. No one can take it from you." Wyatt started building a small pen for chickens. He planted seeds near the back porch. It wasn't much, but it was something. A beginning. He never said it aloud, but he wasn't building it just for himself anymore. One afternoon, as he was trimming the trees, he heard Nora scream. He dropped everything and ran. When he burst into the house, she was holding Hope, shaking. "What happened?" he asked. She pointed to the doorway. On the floor was a folded piece of paper, left just inside the door. Wyatt picked it up and opened it. The handwriting was sharp, clean. "She belongs to us. We'll come for her soon." Wyatt crushed the note in his fist, jaw clenched. "It's time," he said. "They're not going to stop." Nora looked at him, fear rising. "What will we do?" "We'll leave," he said. "Go north. I know a place where the law don't reach. Trees taller than houses, rivers clear as glass. We can disappear there. But the ranch, I can build another ranch," he said. "I can't build another you, or her." Tears filled her eyes, but she nodded. They packed that night. Only what mattered: clothes, food, supplies, Hope's cradle, and Wyatt's rifle. Before dawn, they saddled the horses and rode westward, the sky still dark, the wind biting at their backs. They didn't look back. The sun broke over the horizon like a promise as Wyatt, Nora, and baby Hope rode west, leaving behind the land that had both healed and haunted them. The trail was rough, narrow, sometimes disappearing entirely into thickets and dry creek beds. But Wyatt knew these lands. He had traveled them long ago in his youth, chasing cattle and ghosts. Every night, they made camp beneath the stars. Wyatt kept watch with his rifle, while Nora cradled Hope against her chest, humming soft lullabies as the fire crackled low. They spoke little, but the silence between them was no longer empty. It was full of unspoken vows, shared courage, and fragile beginnings. On the third night, rain fell. They found shelter under a rocky overhang, and Wyatt built a small fire, while Nora sat with Hope wrapped tight in blankets. The rain drummed softly on the stone above them, and for a while, it felt like they were hidden from the world. Wyatt finally spoke. "Back when I was younger, I thought I'd die alone. I used to pray for it, thought it'd be easier than hoping." Nora didn't answer, but she reached out and touched his hand, a gesture simple and full of meaning. "You changed that," he whispered. "You and her." Nora looked down at Hope, sleeping peacefully in her arms. "And you changed me," she said quietly. They didn't kiss, not yet, but their hands remained joined as the fire warmed their skin and the storm moved gently past them. By the end of the week, they reached the northern forests. Towering pines surrounded them, the air turning crisp and clean. Wyatt led them to an old abandoned cabin nestled near a river, the place he'd spoken of. Its roof was crooked, the door hanging by one hinge, but it had strong bones and deep roots. "This'll be home," he said. Together, they repaired it. Wyatt chopped wood, patched the roof, and built a new door. Nora cleaned the interior, humming softly as she swept years of dust away. She laid Hope's cradle by the window, where the morning sun spilled in. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't perfect. But it was theirs. Wyatt carved a wooden plaque for the front. "Hope's Landing." When he nailed it above the door, Nora's eyes filled with tears. "You named it for her?" "I named it for all three of us," he said. Weeks passed, then months. Seasons turned and life bloomed quietly. Hope learned to crawl in that cabin. She giggled when Wyatt tossed her in the air and cried when he left to fetch water from the stream. Nora taught her to clap, to mimic sounds, to smile at birds. The girl was sunshine wrapped in skin, and they both knew it. Wyatt would sometimes pause during chores just to watch them, mother and child in the grass, laughter echoing through the pines. He realized one afternoon, while watching Nora brush Hope's hair with a carved wooden comb, that he didn't just love her, he needed her, like breath, like sky, like forgiveness. That night, he lit a lantern and stepped outside with his thoughts. He looked at the stars and whispered to the wind, "I think I'm ready." The next morning, Wyatt went to town, a small trading post about half a day's ride. He returned with supplies, but also something wrapped in cloth. He didn't say anything at first, just tucked it inside a drawer. Days later, after Hope fell asleep early and the fire burned low, Wyatt stood beside Nora near the window. "I used to think miracles were only for other folks," he said, "people who deserved them. But I was wrong." He pulled the small cloth bundle from his pocket and unwrapped it, revealing a simple silver ring. Nora froze. "I didn't buy you," he said. "I never wanted to own you, but I'd give anything to keep building a life with you." Her eyes welled up. "Will you stay? Not because you have to, but because you choose to." She nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Yes," she whispered. 100 times. "Yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger. It wasn't gold, it wasn't polished, but it gleamed in the firelight like truth. Then he kissed her, soft, slow, with the weight of everything they'd survived behind it. Months rolled into seasons. The forest around Hope's Landing shifted from golden autumn to snow-blanketed silence. Nora stood at the window, holding Hope against her chest, watching flakes swirl across the pine-covered hills. Wyatt had just finished stacking the last of the firewood for winter. His beard had grown thicker, his eyes more peaceful. They were no longer just surviving. They were living. Hope, now nearly walking, babbled endlessly. Her first word wasn't mama or papa, but bird, shouted at a blue jay perched on the windowsill. Wyatt had laughed until tears rolled down his face. One evening, as twilight painted the sky in bruised lavender and orange, Nora sat beside Wyatt on the porch, bundled in a worn wool blanket. "I sometimes forget how I got here," she said softly. "It feels like another life." Wyatt didn't answer right away. He stared at the horizon, then said, "You walked through hell and built heaven out of it." She looked at him. "You did too. But not all ghosts stayed buried. Late one evening, a rider appeared on the trail. His horse was tired, dust-choked, and the man wore a coat too fine for the wild. Wyatt met him at the edge of the property, rifle in hand. "I ain't here to cause trouble," the man said. "Just looking for a girl named Nora Quinn." Wyatt's face darkened. "Why?" The man pulled out a sealed letter. "Her sister's passed, fever, and her mother, too." Wyatt took the letter, but didn't give thanks. He didn't tell Nora right away. That night, after Hope was asleep, he handed her the envelope. She read it in silence, the fire casting shadows across her face. "She's gone," she whispered. Wyatt nodded. "She never apologized. Not once," Nora added, her voice cracking. "She doesn't have to," he said gently. "You already broke free of her." Tears fell, slow and silent. Wyatt wrapped his arms around her and held her through it. "She can't touch you now," he said. "You're home. You're safe." Spring returned with wildflowers and laughter. Hope took her first steps in a field of yellow bloom, toddling toward Wyatt, who caught her mid-fall and lifted her high into the air. Nora clapped and laughed through tears. They started building a barn. Wyatt wanted to raise horses again. Nora planted a vegetable patch near the river, and Hope, ever the explorer, turned the entire forest into her playground, guarded always by her father's watchful eye. One Sunday, they rode into the nearest town, a proper town with a church and a schoolhouse. Nora wore a blue dress, her hair braided down her back. Wyatt, for the first time in years, wore a smile that reached his eyes. People looked, whispered, but no one dared speak ill. When the preacher saw them, he paused. "You here to marry that girl, Wyatt Thorne?" "I already did," Wyatt replied, smiling down at Nora. "Just not with your words." The preacher grinned. "Then let's make it right." So, beneath a tall oak behind the church, with wildflowers as witness, and Hope giggling in her mother's arms, Wyatt and Nora spoke simple vows. He promised to protect her, to honor her, to never forget the strength in her soul. She promised to walk beside him, never behind, never ahead, equal, always. When they kissed, the whole town clapped. Even the birds seemed to sing louder. Years later, when Hope was 6, she asked her mother one evening, "Where did I come from?" Nora knelt beside her daughter and took her tiny hands. "You came from a place of pain," she said honestly, "but you turned it into something beautiful." "Like magic?" Hope asked. "No, sweetheart," Wyatt said, stepping beside them. "Stronger than magic. You came from love that never gave up." Hope smiled and leaned her head against her mama's shoulder. That night, after Hope fell asleep, Wyatt and Nora sat beneath the stars. "You ever think about how it all started?" she asked. "Every day," he said. "A lonely man, a broken girl, and the baby that saved them both." They were quiet for a while. Then Nora whispered, "She's not just our miracle, Wyatt." "No," he said. "She's the reason I believe in second chances." They held hands in the dark, not because they were afraid, but because they had survived the storm and found something rare, not just love, but peace.